the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, lonely nights hitchhiking, frightening nights addled by the moon, never-ending nights under a city on a planet far, far away, and a beautiful illuminated sheepskin commemorative certificate to remind you where you've been. Plus part 38 of our complete audiobook serialization of Larry Correia's Hard Magic. All right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen editor Tony Daniel. This time we talk with Catherine Asaro about her new novel, Undercity. This is the start of a new series set within Catherine's Skolian universe, the major Baen series. It's kind of a noir science fiction hard-boiled mystery, and kind of a life-changing journey for Baen back to her origins on the mean streets of the Undercity, that is, the city literally under the City of Cries. Also, we continue with our complete audiobook serialization of Larry Correia's Hard Magic, as read by Bronson Pinchot. Now here's the news. The December free fiction and nonfiction is now posted on the Baen.com website, and we have some very good stuff for you this month. First, we have a very moving story following the coming of age of a very lonely young man. This is The Night Don't Seem So Lonely by Sharon Lee. It's set in the world of her contemporary fantasy Archer's Beach series. Sharon's latest Archer's Beach novel, Carousel Seas, will be out in January. Also in December, fantasy author David B. Coe delivers a great story of mystery and magic, set in the world of his upcoming contemporary fantasy mystery novel, Spellblind. David has a couple of best-selling epic fantasy series with another publisher. He also writes as D.B. Jackson, but here he is firmly in the present, or at least a present where magic users war for turf, and one former cop and present-day P.I. is caught in the middle seeking justice. The story is Long Night's Moon by David B. Coe. Finally, we have a most wonderful nonfiction essay this month that I really encourage you to check out. This is A Medieval Artist in the 21st Century by Randy Asplund. Randy is the go-to Baen cartographer, but he is also a world-class historical recreator of book illumination and manuscript recreation from the Middle Ages using all original materials, workmanship, etc. In the piece, Randy details how getting it just right, even if that involves growing and harvesting your own woad, became a passion for him, and where it has led him. And he talks a lot about how medieval books were created, and that is just fascinating. The Night Don't Seem So Lonely by Sharon Lee, Long Night's Moon by David B. Coe, and A Medieval Artist in the 21st Century by Randy Asplund are now free to read and enjoy on the main page at Baen.com. I want to welcome Catherine Asaro. Is it Asaro or Asaro, Catherine? I've been wondering a long time.
It's Asaro.
Catherine Asaro to the podcast. Hi, Catherine.
Hi.
Catherine Asaro is actually Dr. Catherine Asaro. She has a Ph.D. in chemical physics from Harvard. She's a former ballet and jazz dancer and founded the mainly jazz dance program at Harvard. She also sings. She's the winner of 2 Nebula Awards for her science fiction and the creator of the popular Skolian saga, which includes Baen books The Ruby Dice, Diamond Star, and Carnelians. She's also the author of Near Future SF Adventures Alpha, which I really loved when I read it some years ago, and Sunrise Alley. Now, Catherine has returned to the Skolian universe to tell a gritty tale of kidnapping and murder set in an underground city filled with societal outcasts. The subseries within the Skolian universe is called Skolian Empire Major Baen series, I believe we're calling it, with the first entry, Undercity. That's the name of the book, which is now out at booksellers everywhere. Catherine, what led you to set this novel, which is kind of a noir science fiction mystery story in the Skolian universe?
Well, You know, at the time when I first wrote The City of Cries, that was a novella which I used for the first few chapters of Undercity. It's not quite the same as the novella, but it's based on it.
Uh-huh.
That was actually commissioned by Mike Resnick for a anthology he was doing called Down These Dark Spaceways. And the idea was to write science fiction mysteries with the feel of, you know, the old style mysteries, like Raymond Chandler, that kind of author. And at the time I was doing quite a bit of Skolian Empire stories, so it just seemed natural to explore the grittier side of the Skolian Empire. Most of my other books involved the Ruby Dynasty, which, because they are, you know, the ruling dynasty or descended from the ruling dynasty, that's not the gritty side of the universe. So I wanted to look at the other different types of characters, you know, explore a side and worlds and communities that I hadn't yet had a chance to write about. I know I had a great time doing it.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So it started from a novella or a short story?
Yeah, the original short story was called The City of Cries, and it won a lot of awards. And I always had been curious to explore more beyond that story. So it seemed tailor-made when I talked to my agent. He said, why don't you write something with that character, Major Baen? And before I knew it, the story just unfolded in my mind.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that she suggested that. So Baen is not on the planet where most of the story takes place at the beginning. And there's a wonderful opening sequence where somebody shows up to take her to Raylicon, which is the planet she's from. In fact, she never intended to return there again. Why didn't she want to go back to her home planet?
Well, you know, Baen grew up in the Undercity. That's the reason the whole book is named that is because the Undercity is its own community. It's very shady, beyond the law, under the ground, and it's just very always in flux. You know, it's part of the City of Cries itself, which is this very wealthy city above the ground, but it's the part that they don't acknowledge exists. There's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of crime. That's one of the reasons it's always in constant flux, because various criminals are coming down and trying to make their mark, and the smugglers are there, the drug dealers are there. And that's where she grew up as an orphan without a family. So she was part of a gang. They called themselves the Dust Gang. And it was a very grueling existence. She almost never even went above ground. She essentially grew up in the dark. They do have lights down there, but that was the most she saw of light, both literally and metaphorically. So when she got out by enrolling in the Army, and she managed to, not only did she enroll in the Army, I mean, you can tell I've been teaching school, I'm saying enroll. She went into the Army, and she was able to do what is believed to be impossible among her people, which is go from an enlisted soldier, she made it into the officer ranks. And that almost never happens in this universe because it's very difficult to do. And so she made quite a life for herself. She moved to another world. The Personia is the seat of the Skolian government, and she's working after she retired from the Army. She became a private investigator with a very ritzy clientele. And so to go back to her home world was essentially going back to this reminder of this terrible life she had as a child. And she tried to go back once before. She did have her childhood love. I mean, they loved each other their entire life until she left. And she did go back and try to make that work, but it didn't. So she left again, and she swore she'd never go back. She liked her life. And then she got this offer of a job, and that's where the book starts.
Yeah. She didn't even know where she was going at the beginning of the book.
didn't. She knew that whoever offered her the job, this anonymous source, which they gave her no information, but they said they wanted to hire her, didn't tell her who they were, nothing about that, but offered her a huge sum of money. And she was intrigued and curious and, of course, attracted by the large amount, even by the standards of the clientele that she had on Porthonia was unusual. So she took the job knowing that she thought it was criminal, actually. And that's why they were being so shady about their job offer.
Well, she finds herself in the royal apartments of, it's Maja, the house that sort of rules this world.
That's right. The House of Majda is probably the second most powerful family in the Skolian Empire. The most powerful is the Ruby Dynasty, of course. Technically, what we call the Empire, the Imperialate, isn't actually ruled by the dynasty anymore. They have an assembly, and that assembly is elected. But the dynasty still has a great deal of power and influence on the politics. After them, the House of Majda is the next most powerful. And you don't mess with them, to put it mildly. And she knows of them because their ancestral home is on Raylicon, the world where she grew up.
The reason that Majda and the Ruby Dynasty are powerful is not necessarily just because they're have a long monarchical tradition, but there are forms of telepathy in this universe. And these guys are able to create it. Let me see if I got this straight. They can make the instantaneous communication network that other people can use, other telepaths can use, and they're extraordinarily rare. Is that accurate?
That pretty much sums it up. When I started writing these books about the Skolian Empire when I was working on my doctoral thesis at Harvard in theoretical physics. And I was doing a lot of things with these mathematical transformations called Fourier transforms. I was playing with things called Hilbert spaces in mathematics. And so my mind was constantly going between the books that I was writing and the math that I was doing for my doctorate. And so I got curious, well, what would happen if you applied, if you could make these mathematical universes that I write about? I mean, they're not really mathematical universes. They're mathematical creations of spaces that are described by functions. And I thought, what if you could do that in real life, if somehow people could actually visit these spaces? And I realized right away, of course, it's a mathematical space. You're not physically going to go there. But the way I work it out in the Skolian Empire books is people can go there with their minds. And the process of transforming from our universe to this place, I call it the Kyle space, is essentially a physical manifestation of transforming a mathematical function from one space to another. So essentially they're doing with their minds, and I even wrote about it in the back of one of the books. I think it was either the moon shadow or spherical harmonic. I wrote about how, a what if of how that might work to do a transformation like that. And it only works on thought. It doesn't work on the physical bodies. So they can transform their thoughts into this space where your position is determined by what you're thinking rather than your physical position. And the advantage of all that long-winded explanation is that your proximity to another person in this place is determined by whatever you're discussing with that person. The thoughts that the two of you are having are what puts you next to each other, not physically where you're located. So it makes instantaneous communication across interstellar distances possible. So, of course, if they have this advantage, it allows them to communicate across these huge distances that define this civilization called the Skolian Imperialate. But to do telepaths come in. They need to have telepaths to be able to access what's essentially technology-induced telepathy. And telepaths are very rare. The weakest of them is 1 in a million. And to get one who can use, transform their minds into this space is even rarer than 1 in a million. And in fact, to actually build the network that's in cryo space that allows them to do this communication requires telepaths so strong that most people can't do it. It would kill them if they tried to. The Ruby Dynasty, the reason they're so powerful is that they can do it. So that's why telepaths are so valuable in this universe.
Yeah. Well, one more thing about the rich guys in the universe before we go on to Undercity. The Majda house is very matriarchal, and it's really cool, sort of the rules you set up for this. Why would anybody want to kidnap? Part of the story revolves around the kidnapping of a prince, and these princes are rare specimens indeed. Why would anybody want to kidnap Prince Daj? He's just a man, after all.
Well, he's very valuable to the house. Just to set up the background, the matriarchy was originally, thousands of years past, was based, the women were warrior queens in a less civilized time of the empire. And they kept their men, their princes, in seclusion. And they went out and conquered worlds. So it's a bit of a role, more than a bit, of a role reversal there. Well, they were, to lay the background for the Skolian Empire, some beings, and it's still a mystery, it's one of the mysteries that hasn't been solved in the series yet, is that some beings that we don't know who they are came to Earth during thousands of years ago and took a group of people from Earth, large group, a lot of inhabitants of Earth, and moved them to this planet Raylicon. They moved them in both time and space. In our past, it was probably about 1,000 years ago. A lot of them were Mayans, and it was roughly at the height of the Mayan Empire, which is not that long ago. But they moved them in time and space both so that when they got them to Raylicon, and they also transformed them to another universe, they were about 6,000 years in the past of their original universe. And so one of the mysteries is, why did these beings do that? And what happened to them? Because all that's left are, the ruins of their starships on the shores of the vanished sea, which is where the city of Christ came into existence. So this group developed as a matriarchy. They're very bellicose, actually, and they set out to figure out, what had happened to them, and could they somehow get off the planet and return to this legendary place called Earth, where they had come from. And they essentially raided the libraries on these ships, and they struggled to learn how to use the science. They didn't do it very well. They established an empire. The empire lasted for a few hundred years, an interstellar empire, and then it collapsed. And that empire was the matriarchy. Then you have about between 3,000 and 4,000 years where essentially it's the Dark Ages. And during that time, civilization is coming into developing on Earth. So by the time they redevelop star travel, they become a more egalitarian society. So really, the city of Christ, it's been a few hundred years since they've rebuilt their empire, the interstellar empire. And the city of Christ, the story takes place in a society that by that time is pretty much egalitarian. The women still tend to control the means of power and authority more than men do, but it's very similar to, our culture in that women have made so many advances. And that's what you see, mirroring it with role reversal in the Skolian Empire. So most everybody, people expect equal rights. But these noble houses are a throwback to the ancient empire when they were very, barbaric and intense warrior race. And the Mazdas, they're not warrior queens. Well, they are in the sense that a lot of them go into the military, the interstellar military, but their empire is more financial now. But they still follow the old traditions of keeping their princes in seclusion. Almost nobody else does this. There's a few noble families, and that's it. But they're very rigid about it. You don't touch their princes. You don't look at it. The princes are secluded, and they're considered extremely valuable. But in the way that something you can't touch or ever see is valuable. And this Prince Dage is, he wants a life.
Mm-hmm.
He's living in an environment where he has very little contact with anyone outside this incredible palace where he lives.
Well, let's talk about the Undercity and the main setting for the novel, which lies literally beneath the city of Cries. Can you explain the physical setup of the place known as Undercity? How is it related to Cries?
Yes.
You've done a little bit of that.
Okay. During the time, in the very beginning, when these people were taken from Earth and stranded on this planet, it was a very different kind of technology that they encountered than what we take for granted now. That is, the technology that led to the building of the city the city of Cries on Raylicon, was a technology that even modern-day Skolians don't understand that well. They're still trying to solve the mysteries of the origins of the city. And one of the mysteries is this immense system of aqueducts that are under the desert. The city of Cries is located in a desert. It's on the shores of the vanished seas, which is called the vanished sea because it no longer has any water. It's huge, but the planet is dying. It was obviously terraformed by someone before the humans came. And the terraforming is gradually, over the millennia, it's been failing. So there's this huge system of aqueducts under the city, but no water runs in them. You know, there's a little bit of water. I mean, there's streams that run through there. There's underground, very kind of acrid mineral lakes. But the aqueducts are empty, and they're huge. I mean, Baj mentions at one point that she doesn't understand why they call them aqueducts, because the amount of water that it would take to run in these aqueducts is so big, there's no way, there's no way you could have this huge amount of water running through there all the time. So one of the mysteries, which is not solved in this particular book, it's a background, is why are those aqueducts there? But the fact is, these ancient, millennia-old aqueducts network, they're under the city, they're under the desert. They've been mapped out by archaeologists at the university in Cries, but nobody really knows their full extent. Even the people who live there, which is the Denzians of the Undercity, don't know its full extent. There's different groups of them. There's many levels. There's 5 or 6 levels at least. And Baj begins to realize in the book that there's levels even below that most of her people aren't aware of. So it's this very shady, complicated, complex society in these very ancient ruins that are the remnants of a civilization over 5,000 years old.
Yeah, it's cool. The feeling that I got was kind of like they're crawling around on the inside of a giant dragon or something, that they can't quite grasp what it all means and what it's for. The concourse, this is kind of the interface between Undercity and Cries.
That's right.
What and it's important in the story. What is that place?
Well, the concourse grew up as it's considered by the people who live in the upper city, the city of Cries itself, as part of the Undercity, but it's not really. It's just below the surface. You can actually walk down some stairs from a plaza at the edge of the city, and you're walking into the concourse. And it's really more of a touristy, very wide boulevard with, at the beginning, it's actually rather ritzy. It's got clubs and, dance places and restaurants and cafes and bistros. And then as you go down, it's just sloping down slightly, but it goes on for more than a kilometer. And it gets less and less ritzy and more poverty-stricken, and, the restaurants give way to little booths and stalls, and by the time you get to the end, it's this very narrow, smoky alleyway, essentially, that opens up into like the entrance of a cave, and then that leads down to the true Undercity. And the place, even though the concourse is supposed to be part of the Undercity, if the kids or the people from the Undercity actually go up there, the police chase them away, right? Because they don't want them ruining the tourist business. When people come to visit Christ, they think they're going to this, shady, dangerous place when they go to the concourse, but it isn't really. It's a tourist place.
Yeah. Well, Bajan left, but she left Undercity, but her childhood and teenage duster gang, they call themselves, stayed. Some have gotten along okay, and some not so well. One of the most interesting is her former love interest, Jack. Now, he's the proprietor of an interesting nightclub, the Black Mark, which is very hard to find, right?
It's a casino. Yeah. The Black Mark is illegal. It's a casino, and gambling is against the law in the City of Christ. Rayacon is very conservative. The planet is one of the City of Christ, which is really there's not many places where people live on the planet anymore, because most of it is not particularly good for human life. The City of Christ is probably the major city with the only major starport. And it's very conservative. It's the seat of an ancient government that was thousands of years old. And one of their conservative outlooks is no gambling. Very strict. Everything about the city is very strict. And that's part of what fuels the Undercity. Is, people react against that. So Jack started his casino with the winnings that he got. He had a famous hand. He had a royal flush in a poker game, and he won a huge amount of money. He almost got killed after that, and it's one of the reasons that Baj got upset, because he disappeared. Finally, he showed up again, and he built this casino. But he has to keep it secret, because if he's caught, of course, he'll be arrested, thrown into jail. Really, seriously, the people, the authorities in Christ knows it exists, but, if they all play the game, he doesn't step on their toes and they don't step on his toes. But he has to be very discreet about it. So you can't go to his casino unless, he tells you how to get there. You have to be invited. And he's constantly moving it. So even if you knew where it was, say, 2 months ago, you probably couldn't find it today.
Yeah, well, he's a very winning character. He's kind of Bogarty, perhaps, in a way, although he's...
He is.
Yeah.
He's in some ways quite amoral. I mean, he has absolutely no problem with running this illegal casino, but he's also a very decent human being underneath that, and he tends to support the community by hiring the people who have no sources of income, since the people in the Undercity that can't get jobs in the upper city, there's extreme prejudice against them, and it's very difficult for them to get any kind of employment or interaction or schooling or anything with the above city. It was very difficult for Baj to enlist in the army because of that. Jack offers jobs. He looks out for the people. He tries to make sure that his employees are well fed, that their families are looked after, that they get proper medical care. So even though, in a sense, he's a villain, I mean, in the sense that he's doing things he's not supposed to do, but he's not really. He's a very complicated character.
Well, somebody who's not that complicated or not that sane is Scorch, who's a bit of a whack job. How did she survive in the Undercity? How does because that she really is sort of the underside of the Undercity in a way.
Yes. Scorch survived by being meaner, more malicious, and more vicious than everybody else. And she's smart. I mean, Scorch may be psychotic, but she's also brilliant. And so she turned her psychosis to, rising to become one of the most powerful Undercity crime bosses. She isn't one of the biggest ones. She's kind of in the second tier because, there's a point where you become so vicious that it's hard to get people to follow you. Her employees have a tendency to get killed.
Mm-hmm.
So she's been successful in part because she's gotten rid of a lot of her competition. But ultimately, there's limitations to how far she could go. But actually, one of Baj's former gang members has probably become the most powerful Undercity crime lord.
Which would be Digjon, or...
Yes, that's right. Digjon was, there were four of them in the gang that Baj ran with. It was Digjon, Kajta, and Jack, Rajan's lover, and then another guy named Gord, this very large, very smart young man who became, they call him the Waterman, or Gord in the Undercity, because he builds water filtration systems. And it takes Baj leaving the planet, getting an education off-world. She herself has a degree in engineering. And then coming back to realize he's brilliant. He's a brilliant engineer, but it's all self-taught. And he helps, build things that make the Undercity livable. That's one of the things he does. So he's still there, and he's doing quite well. He's very hard to find. Jack is still there. Digjon is still there. She's risen to become... She's probably one of the two most powerful crime bosses in the Undercity. She's a drug runner.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons Baj left, because she couldn't handle the direction that her closest... Digjon was her family, more than just her friend. That was the only family that Baj had. And when she saw the direction that Digjon was going, she realized she didn't want that. And that's when she left. She left when she was 16 to enlist in the army.
Well, talk about the kids a little, because Baj is a lot of the story and a lot of the feeling in the story comes from Baj really caring about these kids that are still in the Undercity, and that relationship drives the second part of the book in particular. She was one of them. What was it like to grow up as a kid in the Undercity?
Very intense. They didn't have access to regular schooling. They didn't have access to any of the infrastructure that most of us take for granted. They had, things like schools and support systems and traditional families. There's very little of that in the Undercity. They tend to run in gangs, at least the community that she was part of. There were four of them in the gang. The gang tends to be loosely affiliated when they're children with adults. But because the survival rate is not very high in the Undercity, there's a lot more children than there are adults. The adults there's a flux in and out of the Undercity. It's not a separate, completely separate sphere from the upper city. There's a lot of flux in and out. So there's always adults, but usually they're criminals coming down to get involved in the black market. People who've lived there all their lives and who have, grown up there. There are families or familial lines that have been down there for centuries, millennia even, they begin to realize. And they've evolved their own cultures, even physically in some ways they're different. The ones who live the farthest down can't even, they have to cover their eyes, protect their eyes when they come up into the light. And for Bajan, that's what she grew up with. This is the environment she grew up in. Very gritty, but at the same time she formed very strong ties with the people in her group. They looked after each other. The kids essentially took care of each other. And they usually had a person who was adults, a few adults that were, helped look after the children. But the children tended to run in packs on their own, and that's what she did. They did learn. They taught themselves. They learned by direct interaction with their environment, and also by knowledge that was passed down from generation to generation. Some of it for, ages and ages, longer than most of them realize. So when she comes back and she goes down into the Undercity, and of course the people who live there know she's an outsider, right? At least in the sense that she clearly comes from the above city. But she knows how to fit in because she grew up there. So they watch her warily. I was just going to say, over the course of the book, I don't want to give away too much, but this develops over the course of the book as, she thinks through the problems and tries to come up with solutions. And she's in a unique position, having grown up there. One of the few people who was quite successful, who was able to get out, become quite successful, and then has come back. So, she's in a rather unique position to do something.
Yeah. Well, it's what makes it fun and a fun read is also that they just are not able to take advantage of her because of her background, and they gain this respect for her because they're not going to be able to roll her or kill her or anything.
First time, that's right. Yeah, the first time someone tries to mug her, they get a bit of a surprise. They don't realize she's a cybernetically enhanced, super high trained, former military officer who was essentially the equivalent of a high-tech futuristic commando.
Yeah. And she also knows exactly what they're up to. That's because she's from there.
Oh, definitely.
So,
yeah,
that's a great scene.
All these enhancements in her body too.
Yeah. Well, one of the interesting things, if you want to speak to it a little bit, is the way that she has Max, her AI, in her head that helps her out, and her little surveillance devices. That was kind of cool subpart of the book. How does that work?
Well, I figured we're already, just in real life, we're already looking at things to enhance, technological enhancements of, military personnel. And I thought, all right, we have to extend this into the future. And of course, we're going to incorporate more and more technological augmentation into our bodies. She has quite a bit. She has biohydraulics that enhance her strength and her reflexes and her speeds. Of course, this all has to be run by an energy source. You can't do it without some sort of input of energy. She has a microfusion reactor in her body. So she's quite a piece, and she is considered as a former military officer. In a sense, part of the advanced equipment of the military. It's because she rose to be a major in the Army, she has a pretty good system. And it includes enhanced vision, it includes enhanced hearing, augmentation so that she can see, for example, in infrared. And she's got Max, an AI that is implanted in her spine, in her neural system, intertwined with her neural system. I won't go into all the details. I worked all this out when I first began writing the Skolian Empire books, and I got input from various, not only from military types, but also from neuroscientists to figure out how something like that would actually work if we had the neurotechnology to create a system to meld an artificial intelligence with with the human neural system. So she has that, and she calls him Max, and they have a lot of conversation. He's essentially a character in the book.
Yeah, he's very droll.
She sometimes, yeah, he knows her well. He knows her well, and he's developed a personality. She hasn't quite figured out if it's a real personality or if he just, he's such a good IA, he developed a personality able to deal with her. But it's kind of a moot point. Mm. He interacts with her as if he is a sentient being.
Yeah, he passes the smart aleck part of the Turing test as well.
He does do that.
So what are you working on at the moment? Where are we going to see more of Major Bajan? What's up in your writing universe?
Well, yeah, I'm currently putting together another book with Major Bajan. It's a slightly different kind of case, but it also is going to take place on Raylicon. I want to expand what's going on within the Undercity. She has this, I don't want to give it away, but she started something there. And although it was a major part of the book Undercity, it was a bit in the background. It wasn't, the major story was the mystery and then its solution and then the new, bigger mystery that created. But always in the background is what this, her interactions with the Undercity and the young people there. And I would like to develop that more. I mean, there's hints of it, especially at the end of Undercity. One of the last few paragraphs where, we get a hint of what the future is, of what she's just started. And I'd like to play with that more, too.
The book we've been discussing is Undercity by Catherine Asaro. It's now available at booksellers everywhere. Catherine, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, well, thank you.
And now here is part 38 of the complete audiobook serialization of Larry Correia's Hard Magic. It's read by Bronson Pinchot. This portion of Hard Magic is provided by Audible.com. Get the complete audiobook at Audible.com now. If you're not a subscriber, you can get the entire audiobook free or choose from more than 100,000 other titles when you try Audible free for 30 days. Here's the setup for what's coming up. It's the 1930s in America, but it's an America that has been magically changed. In the 1860s, a handful of people from all walks of life were visited with special magical talents, and each generation more are so affected. These people are called actives. Most actives use their powers for good, but some do not. Jake Sullivan is a private eye. He's also a former soldier, an ex-con, and an active heavy, the type of active who controls the force of gravity. Jake has been recruited by a mysterious secret organization of actives dedicated to seeing humanity through a possible magic-based apocalypse. They are known as the Grim Noir Knights. If the Grim Noir are to be believed, the evil forces of magic introduced into the world have reached a peak, and the apocalyptic finale for humanity may be about to begin. Here is Bronson Pinchot with Part 38 of the complete audiobook serialization of Larry Correia's Hard Magic.
Chapter 16. As an eminent pioneer in the realm of high-frequency currents, I congratulate you on the great success of your life's work, but I am of the sad belief that your peace ray may have been inappropriately named. Albert Einstein, letter to Nikola Tesla for Tesla's 75th birthday, 1931. Mar Pacifica, California. "Been a long time, Jake," his brother said, still blocking the rifle barrel. Sullivan looked past the ruined face to where Delilah was lying on her back, hands pressed against her stomach, blood leaking between her fingers. "Go to hell, Matty," he snarled, reaching for his power and spiking it hard. Magic crashed against magic. "It's Mad D now." His teeth gnashed together behind ruined lips as he fired his own power. Gravity collided and ruptured around them. Matthew was my old name, my weak name. I had to take a new one as an Iron Guard. Remember where it came from? Yeah, Jimmy had a hard time with T's. The destroyed body of the summoned and the rubble around it fell into the sky. Delilah screamed as she was shoved across the lawn. Heinrich was heading their way when he suddenly tumbled backward, flailing toward the house. I forgot how strong he was. I got baptized in the blood of the innocent, the only decent Sullivan there's ever been. Maddie's tie was whipping around his face, torn back and forth as the pull of the earth shifted. Our brother deserved better. You think Jimmy would want this? Sullivan hissed as the ground underfoot began to sink. Water from the broken pipes spun weightless around them. His power had already been used hard on the demon, and he could feel it weakening. He was too good and pure and dumb to know what he wanted. Maddie didn't even seem to feel the strain. Heat was radiating from his body as dozens of kanji burned magic. But he was strong. We all were, but we gave our lives to protect the pathetic. They used us. And how'd they thank us? You saved 1,000 lives and you come home to what? Going to prison because you tried to keep some active kid from getting lynched? Like you would have cared. His pulse was pounding inside his skull. It was almost like he could see the line of power stretching from his soul to the center of the earth, and it was flickering bad. He was almost done. They didn't even waste a healer to fix my face. Whole unit only had a few healers. They did just enough to keep you from dying. It's called triage, dummy, Jake said. Maddie had too much power. With the forces buffeting them, the first to slip would be crushed. You were always the ugly one anyways. Maddie laughed. And you were always supposed to be the smart one. Suddenly, Maddie dropped his power, but rather than being smashed by the sudden increase in pressure, his body flared in strength like a brute as he took the hit. The dirt around them exploded outward in a shower. Sullivan staggered back, surprised. Who's the smart one now? Maddie asked as he slugged Sullivan in the face. Sullivan rocked back. The blow rattled his thickened bones. Maddie kept coming, hitting him over and over and over again, moving faster than was humanly possible. It was like being worked over by a meat hammer. See, Jake, I'm the strongest there is. I've got the magic of 10 actives now. What you got? He knocked Sullivan's return punch aside with one casual forearm. Sullivan ducked a hook, falling on his butt, then jerked up the bar and fired. The magazine had mostly been expended on the summoned, but at least 5 rounds struck Maddie in the chest, exiting his back in gouts of meat and fabric. His brother fell, crashing hard into the ground. Sullivan lay there gasping, bleeding. His head was swimming from the beating. He had just killed his own blood. Then Maddie got up. Ah, yeah, felt that one. Blood was pouring from the holes in his chest. Sullivan scrambled back as Maddie strode toward him. Like I was saying, I'm the strongest. He slammed a boot into Sullivan's chest, rolling him hard. I can see that pissant little healing spell on your chest. You think that makes you a big man or something? He booted him again. Shit, I got 5 of those. He managed to get to his hands and knees, but Maddie's next kick landed in his ribs and lifted him several feet off the ground. Maddie is here, Faye shouted as she appeared in what was left of the foyer. We know, Garrett said, pointing with one bloodied hand toward where a maelstrom of water, dirt, concrete, and fog was swirling across what had been the lawn. It was terrible to behold. Somewhere inside there were the 2 titans slamming each other with powers beyond comprehension. Heinrich appeared, carrying Delilah's limp form in his arms. She seemed so very small, and there was blood all over the German's coat. "Jane!" he shouted. "Help!" He set her down gently where the piano had been. "1 second," Jane replied. She was crouched next to Mr. Browning, who was bleeding profusely from a bullet wound to his neck. "Keep pressure on her, Heinrich." "Help the girl," Browning whispered, his teeth stained red. "I'm fine." "No offense, John, but shut your yap and don't tell me how to do my job." Jane responded calmly, her hands glowing like molten gold. Lance shrugged past Faye, working the action on his Winchester. Undead are coming. All those assholes we killed once are back up and moving this way fast. Heinrich closed his eyes and let out a long string of something that Faye could only assume was profanity. Zombies. They've got their damned necro. And Lazarus. Grandpa's Bible teachings hadn't been very good, but Faye didn't remember any of the dead people who came back to life in the New Testament going insane with a desire to kill like the radio show said this kind did. On the other hand, she'd slept through a lot of masses. I got the one with the demon. If I shoot the man with the zombies, will that make the magic stop? She asked. Nein, undead are different, Heinrich said as he shoved what had once been the living room curtains against Delilah's wound. Their spirits can't leave their bodies. They have been chained forever. How do we stop them? Faye asked. The same show on the radio had made it sound like you could just shoot them in the head and they'd leave you alone, but she knew that those programs were just make-believe. This was real. You can't. You just damage them until they can no longer move, but it's difficult when they are still sane and have guns. How many, Lance? Probably 20 undead. I don't know how many alive. More than we can handle, Heinrich stated with grim finality. The Lazarus will whisper to them that the only way to end the pain is to destroy us. Poor bastards don't even realize they're dead yet. The way the others acted when he said that made Faye certain that the German was their expert on zombies. The storm of flying debris finally stopped, and everything instantly fell as gravity returned to normal. All of them turned to see who had won, and sadly, all they saw was Mr. Maddy kicking Mr. Sullivan across the yard like a child's ball. Behind the two giants was a crowd of mangled bodies running right for them. The dead men were shrieking and crying, bones visible, flesh hanging off in strips where the slugs had hit, eyes bulging out of shattered skulls, bullet holes fresh and puckered in drained skin, white shards sticking out of broken limbs, and somehow she knew that they could still feel it all, every terrible, unending ounce of hurt. And all those dead men held her and her friends responsible. The dead lifted their guns, and Faye's insides turned to water. Maddy grabbed Sullivan by the throat and jerked him from the ground. Hell, Jake, his brother said, punching him in the stomach. I had this all built up in my head like you were going to be a challenge. This is just like when we were kids. Sullivan blinked through the blood and tears. He grabbed Maddy by the tie, pulled him forward, and rammed his elbow into the side of his head. Maddy dropped him and stepped back, rubbing his face, grinning savagely. That's more like it. Sullivan stood shakily, spit a blob of blood, and raised his fists. You always were a bully. You ain't seen nothing yet, Maddy said. He paused as his watch spoke to him with a woman's voice. He lifted it and listened. Hell. Fun as this has been, I'm about to fry this whole area with a peace ray. You're distracting me from my mission. You seen a piece of a Tesla device around here? Sullivan stepped forward, put his weight into it, and swung a big right at Maddy's face. Maddy dodged it so quickly that the air whistled around him. He responded by clubbing Sullivan effortlessly to the ground. Guess not. Sullivan gasped as a heavy boot slammed onto his spine, pinning him down. There was a popping of snaps, a creak of a leather harness, and finally a loud metallic click as a hammer was cocked. So long, Jake. Any last words? Mama always liked me best, Sullivan grunted, sputtering out a bloody laugh. Maddy aimed the beast at the back of Jake's head. If he had more time, he'd let his brother know just how much this moment meant to him. He could actually feel. It was a bittersweet victory, and the old, weak, sickly part of him was screaming, no! But he pushed that part back down into the deep well where he kept it chained in black, poisoned waters. He pulled the trigger. Then there was a snap of air and a pair of gray eyes shining in the dark as Jake vanished. The bullet dug a .50 caliber hole in the ground. Matty looked up at the mansion, a snarl parting his ruined lips. I'm getting so tired of her. Hirayasu's zombies were passing them, charging blindly toward the house. The morons didn't even realize they were dead yet. Some of them were shooting, screaming, bones sticking out their faces, or dragging their intestines behind them in long, steaming trails. About damn time. A few of the living goons approached him cautiously, carrying their new Arisaka subguns, following the zombies. Those were the brave and stupid. The cowards in the ranks had probably bolted and run as soon as they'd realized he wasn't about to waste any perfectly good corpses. He glared at the remaining men. What? We've almost got A rifle bullet hit him in the shoulder, tore through his flesh until it struck his collarbone and shattered. He grimaced as the fragments tore a dozen separate wound channels through his flesh, and a chunk of bone pierced his heart. Damn it. Even he had his limits, and time was almost up. Toshiko was yelling at him that they needed to fire soon or risk discovery. No matter what, the Imperium couldn't afford to be implicated. It was time to finish this. He followed the blood trail of the dead mob, murder in his wounded heart.
That was part 38 of the complete audiobook serialization of Hard Magic by Larry Correia, read by Bronson Pinchot. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com. Thanks to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. And Giant Fountains of Happily Dancing Water and Stars for Catherine Asaro, author of Undercity, now at booksellers everywhere. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy storytelling. And keep reaching for the stars.
We're Santa's elves in the workshop, making lots of toys for good girls and boys.